Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the community table. We are so excited to be kicking off a brand new year of conversations every month, all year long here at Beyond Type 1. We're focusing on crucial issues faced by the entire diabetes community, and tonight is no exception. We're talking about planning and setting goals with diabetes and making this your best year yet. For now, I'm going to ask our amazing panelists to go ahead and come on video. And I'm going to hand it off to the incredible Ginger VIEIRA, who is going to moderate this conversation tonight. Ginger, please feel free to take it away.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Community Table. We are here on behalf of Beyond Type 1. And tonight we are talking about planning and creating goals with diabetes. So I think we should start with some introductions. I will just start right here, make it easy. I've lived with type 1 for 23 years, celiac for 22, and fibromyalgia for maybe 8 years. And I am the senior content manager at Beyond Type 1, and I've been writing for years about diabetes in different areas of the internet and books as well. And the reason, though, that I am really excited to be here tonight is because 10 years ago in my youth, in my 20s, I spent a lot of my time coaching people with diabetes, working as a personal trainer and as an Ashtanga yoga instructor. So I really love helping people create goals that help them feel successful and empowered and ready to rock the year. Let's introduce some of the awesome people who are on our panel tonight. QUISHA, can we start with you? Can you tell me more about you?
Good evening, everyone. QUISHA UMEMBA. I am the co-founder and director of the board for Diversity in Diabetes, which is a nonprofit organization still in our infancy. We really focus on increasing awareness around diversity in the diabetes space and helping to increase representation of diabetes educators, healthcare professionals, et cetera. I am a registered nurse, and I always forget how long. I think about 14 years now. In about 8 of those years, I've been a certified diabetes care and education specialist. Not clinical now and have not been for some time, but spent years taking care of patients with different types of diabetes. My father has type 2 diabetes. I have had gestational diabetes and pre-diabetes for several years. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight. Of course, being a diabetes educator, I've done hours of health coaching, helping patients to set those SMART goals and to create those plans that set them up for success. So excited to share my experience with you all tonight.
Mark?
Hello, everybody. I'm Mark HEYMAN. I'm a diabetes psychologist and certified diabetes care and education specialist. And I run an organization called the Center for Diabetes and Mental Health based in San Diego. So what we do is we help people navigate some of the most stressful psychosocial challenges of living with type 1 diabetes. And I've been living with type 1 diabetes myself for 22 years now. 22? Yeah, 22, almost 23 years. So Ginger and I are, we're di twins. Is that the right way of saying it? Almost. And I'm looking forward to having this conversation tonight. You know, goals are such an important part of the diabetes game, and we want to make sure that we're being realistic and empowering in setting the goals as opposed to setting ourselves up for failure. So looking forward to the conversation.
Wait, Mark, don't forget to tell them about your podcast, which is a really great way to boost your diabetes enthusiasm.
Yes, so I am the host of the Diabetes Psychologist podcast. You can find that at thediabetespsychologist.com/podcast or on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We do an episode every Thursday. So we released one this morning, and it's all about diabetes and mental health. Ginger was a guest on my podcast a couple months ago. So go find that episode.
And Liz, tell us about you.
Hi, I'm Liz CAMBRON. I'm a type 2 diabetic since 2014, so going about 7 years now. I'm still trying to figure things out as I go. I am a molecular biologist by trade, so I actually studied insulin signaling in insects, which is really cool because they have similar signal that we do, but you know, very different health. So that's been really interesting and fun to really study it while I'm living it. So I'm really excited to share kind of what I've learned along the way and the importance of goal setting with diabetes.
Cool. Well, thank you, all three of you, for joining us tonight. So we already have really explained our connection to diabetes, but could you tell me a little bit about each of you, what your maybe overarching philosophy is when it comes to creating a goal for diabetes and why it's important, because it's like 24/7, the same thing every day. Why do we need a goal? Or should we not be aiming for the same thing every day? And anybody with diabetes for a second knows that's really overwhelming. Could you tell me a little bit about your philosophies towards goal setting? We'll start with you, QUISHA.
Yeah, I would say my philosophy is really not related just to diabetes. I do believe that setting goals sets you up for success in every aspect of your life. And I think that it can certainly be applied to chronic disease management like diabetes, of course. For me, I've always, been told if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And so setting those goals and setting those roadmaps along the way to kind of check in with yourself, make sure that you stay on target for whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. So yes, it's absolutely imperative that you set goals to manage your condition, but you really can apply those across the board. It's kind of like we were talking before we started about me trying to write the book, right? I'm trying to bite off more than I have to. And you're like, oh, just write a sentence every day. It's the same thing with setting your goals as well. It's just something that you keep at just a little bit every day. And again, it sets you up for success. It helps you plan, it helps you prepare. So for me, it applies through every aspect of your life.
Probably a lot of people are already setting goals quite well in other parts of their life and just maybe not realizing you can apply that same approach to something very specific about diabetes. Absolutely. Liz, Mark, don't let me hold you back.
Yeah, I think that, diabetes for so many people can feel like a big black hole. And you feel like you have no idea kind of where you're going, and you feel like you're just kind of like batting things down and dealing with kind of all the emergencies and putting out fires all the time. And setting goals can help you take a bigger picture and help you kind of just help you see what direction you want to be in. And when I think about goals with diabetes, people always look at things like A1C and, kind of these diabetes goals, but I want you to think about expanding the way you think about goals a little bit further to how can I improve my quality of life? How can I be more free and flexible in my life with type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes for that matter? And how can you, how can you move in the direction that you want to go in? Not the direction your doctor wants you to go in, not the direction your sister wants you to go in, but the direction you want to go in. And goals can really give you those guideposts to get you there.
Yeah, I mean, those are all really great points. I think my overall philosophy is do what works for you. Diabetes is a very personal illness that, it's different for everybody. And so it's really hard to sometimes focus on one thing. And that's why goals are so important, because there's so many different things out there that, people try that works for them, but then you try and doesn't work for you. So having goals that are specific to you really makes a difference on just navigating this day by day, focusing in on one thing a day, versus, like Mark said, this big black hole that you don't really know where what you're diving into and how you got here, but we just have to keep moving forward.
Yeah,
I love that. I want to add to it. You said, Mark, I can't remember exactly how you put it, but one of the things that I always say is goals give you clarity. And so I think it's, just like both of you said, one of the biggest things that I've noticed that people do when they're setting goals, especially when it relates to health goals, is they will tend to try to change like 5, 6, 7, 10 things at one time. It's like, oh, I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to exercise, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to cut out meat. And they try to make that change all at one time, and then they're not successful at anything. And so, it's taking the small steps, one at a time, like we're saying here. And when you set that goal, it gives you that clarity that I'm just going to focus on this one thing, and I'm going to do this one thing. And then once I master it or achieve it, then I can focus on something else.
Something that actually really, sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Oh, one thing I wanted to say is one thing about goals in diabetes, we always default back to some goals that we don't have complete control over. So I want to get my time in range up. I want to get my A1C down. I want to lose weight. And not to say you don't have any control over those, you certainly do, but you don't have complete control over them. There's all these variables that kind of come into play that you don't have much control over. And so setting goals around those things is super helpful to an extent. But what I want to encourage you to do as you think about goals is to think about behaviors. What are things that you can actually commit to doing? I can write 1 sentence a day in my book for my book. I can choose to have, not drink soda at all during the day, all right? Whatever that behavioral goal is, because not only does that one help you get to those glycemic goals and also maybe even emotional goals, but it also sets you up for success because you have the ability to actually do it. If you say, I'm gonna go for a walk around the block tonight, well, I can choose to do that or not. If I say I want my blood sugar to be, below 200 before bed, I can have some influence over that, but there's a possibility that I can't achieve that, which then makes me feel like I haven't been successful. So I want to set you up for success. And guess what happens when you do that? When you do the behavioral goals, generally speaking, the blood sugar and all the other things generally follow along, as opposed to the other way around.
That's so I love that you just explained that, because what I was going to say is that one thing that really helps me is not to focus on, like, the goal is never my A1C. I feel like what's helped me achieve and maintain my A1C is by focusing on the little tasks that I know help me feel good during the day and help make blood sugar management easier. And they're really specific things, like I have a personal, I don't know if it's even a goal. It's like a daily, it is a goal. I check the box mentally, eat vegetables with my breakfast is something that helps me feel really good when I start the day. And it sets me up for making good choices at lunch. So it's like this domino effect. Getting at least 30 minutes of cardio in the morning sets my brain up for like feeling really energized and good and energetic throughout the day. And then it makes me want to exercise again later in the day. And so it's like, again, that domino effect of the little details. And I think way too often we think goals are lose 20 pounds. And it's like, that's not very rewarding because it's so far down the road. And it's way more rewarding to be like, look, I ate vegetables for breakfast today. I'm doing awesome. And you get that reward every day, every time you make that choice.
Mm.
All right. So Mark, specifically for you, when you have patients who are struggling with burnout, and everybody can, of course, chime in on this, of your thoughts on burnout, but where would someone who is totally burnt out, and burnout can mean a lot of things, but in this sense, I'm talking about someone who is still taking their insulin, keeping themselves, alive in a basic way, but really burnt out on carb counting, on taking your insulin every time you eat, checking your blood sugar at all, or maybe very infrequently. Where do you start? How do you help someone kind of refocus there without getting overwhelmed?
Yeah, so I think that I want to say two things. The first is start small. If the person is taking care of themselves and is safe, then really starting small and making sure that they're, taking small steps forward. Because whether you're jogging, whether you're sprinting, or whether you're walking an inch at a time, you're still moving forward, and that's really the important thing. But actually, I would say that setting goals for people who are feeling burnt out is actually really helpful, because it, whether they're small goals or medium goals, I wouldn't stretch too far, because that's overwhelming. But it helps stay on track. It helps you feel like you're moving forward. And because part of the process of feeling burnt out is feeling like you're not moving forward, and no matter what you're doing, you're not getting anywhere. There's no value in your behavior. And so by setting goals, you can show yourself that, one, you can do it. And that gives you a sense of pride and self-efficacy. But second of all, it shows you that, okay, I can do this, and I can actually have an influence over how I feel physically, mentally, and what my blood sugars are. And that is incredibly empowering to help you get, help you, I don't want to say get over burnout, because that's a dangerous thing to say, navigate around the stress of diabetes.
Right. Okay. And it's really rewarding. I mean, just like, I think in someone who is struggling with burnout might look at someone who is thriving with diabetes and not realize that the main thing that's probably motivating that person to do all the little things that help them feel good is because they feel better. And so finding one little thing maybe that you could focus on that will help you feel a little better physically, mentally, whatever it is, and letting that domino.
I mean, it's so interesting. I get, every once in a while, I see a teenager who is struggling, and their parent comes to me and they say, I think I want to scare them into managing their diabetes better. I want to take them to a dialysis clinic, or I want to show them someone who is really in bad shape. And I say, whoa, hold on a minute. Psychologically, that doesn't work very well. I mean, because one, it's not a good idea. But second of all, we have a really hard time seeing past tomorrow. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and if I were to offer her one cookie today or 10 cookies a week from now, there's no doubt she's gonna take one cookie today because she can't even think about what a week from now looks like.
Right,
And neither can we. So but I can say that if I work out this morning, the rest of my day is gonna feel really good. And that in and of itself is motivating. And so thinking about goals in terms of what is your immediate payoff as opposed to what is like this long-term payoff that may or may not actually happen is really, it makes it much more tangible. And having goals that are tangible is extremely powerful.
Yeah.
Liz. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to provide a perspective just from kind of, a nursing, health coaching type of background. I've worked with clients experiencing diabetes burnout. Sometimes, depending on the client, you can't set a goal at that time. You have to really get to the root cause of the issue of what's going on in their life at that time and help them address and overcome that. And then once they've overcame or you've addressed and hopefully resolved that issue, you can start doing some goal setting and action planning with them. So I just wanted to, everything that you said, Mark, I completely agree with that. Another thing that I think is really important for individuals that are experiencing that type of distress is celebrating those small wins. Like, I've had patients come in and say, oh, well, I was supposed to not eat fast food today and I did. And I'll say, well, you ate fast food only once and you normally eat it 3 times a day. Like, we're celebrating, right? So I don't think that a lot of times people realize things like that still is a win, right? It may not be a perfect win, but it's still a win. So celebrating the little things that they accomplish as well helps motivate people to continue toward their goals.
And you kind of hit on a really important thing of goal setting, QUISHA, because you said, well, you ate it once that week instead of every day. I think it's really important to try to avoid goals that require perfection, because I don't want to go the rest of my life without eating chocolate. Is like, if I set a goal to never eat dessert again, that will not go well. I will feel like a failure pretty quickly. And setting realistic goals that are like really giving you the freedom to be an imperfect human being. And, even if my goal was to only eat chocolate once a day, and on Thursday I have chocolate twice a day, it's like, you got to brush off and pick back up and get back to square one. And, it can't beat yourself up for it forever.
Absolutely.
So I have this phrase that I tell my friends and the people that I keep in my diabetes community, that your 100% is going to look different every day, and that's okay. So eating 2 chocolates, if that was the best you could do for today, that's great. Figuring in the grand scheme of things, is one fast food meal really going to set you that far back? Nobody looks back and remembers, oh, I didn't eat that one meal. Like, live in the moment. And that's something that I think is really hard for a lot of people to do, is, okay, what is this in the moment going to really impact me? But we can't think that far ahead and how it's going to impact us later. So looking at what you can do today, if you're giving it your best, be completely flexible with your methods of reaching your goals, but keeping focused on those goals.
Yeah. And that reminds me also again of, like, I'm going to use my stepdaughter as an example. So she wants to be able to do chin-ups, but she can do only half of one. And in her head, you can only do chin-ups if you can do like 8 or 10. But if she does half a chin-up every single day, that's quite a few chin-ups total for the week. And that's going to build to being able to do 1 full chin-up every day, which is then 7 chin-ups a week. And 7 times 4, that's a lot of chin-ups in a month. But the same, I use the same thing with people who are struggling with being able to do a push-up. It's like, just do 2 push-ups every night. And by the end of the month, you'll have done a lot of push-ups. So the same could be said for in reverse of, if you're trying to cut back alcohol intake and you normally drink 7 nights a week and 2 glasses every night, that's 14 glasses a week. Cut it down to a certain amount, and now you've hugely reduced your overall consumption that month. Of thinking of different ways about creating goals and seeing your success.
I'd also like to add that resting can also be a goal. Like, not doing anything can also be a goal. And I think that's really important for when you're at that burnout point, to kind of let yourself calm down, reset. And when you're ready to have goals that require energy, that require you being very active, like exercising, or mentally active, like having to think about meal planning and prepping, when you're ready to get to that point, that's great. But if you're not there yet, and if you really just need to not have other goals other than just resting and healing, that I think is also very important to know.
Thank you for saying that. I think people forget that resting, doing nothing is also a form of self-care. Talking to myself here also, but that needed to be said out loud.
And it's one of the hardest goals to set and actually follow through with, it's a cognitive shift of like, a goal is to just sit and do nothing. Wow, it's an awesome one, and I wish that I could do it more.
Especially with cell phones, it's so hard with a cell phone nearby. I think it might be helpful if anyone could just list some very specific goals that anybody watching might just attach to and be like, that's the kind of thing that I want to work on. Can you list just some specific diabetes related or health related? Everything affects diabetes, so it doesn't have to be specifically.
I think one, and it's for people with diabetes, but it's certainly for the general population. I don't think people realize how important sleep is. And so it's actually in my phone. I have a couple reminders. One, take a bubble bath every Friday night. That's actually an alarm. And I have an alarm for when I'm supposed to go to bed and get up. I struggled with sleep for a very long time. I would take NyQuil, I would take other over-the-counter things, and it took months to really get to where I could just lay down, get the phone out of my hand, and just rest. But I think that's really important in general, but certainly for individuals with diabetes, because it helps improve blood glucose levels. So I would say that's a goal that a lot of times people tend to forget about, but it's—
How would they go about, could you give a specific, like what's the action that you'll do to help yourself get more sleep?
They need to set their hours, right? So I think textbook is like adults need 7 to 9 hours, but everybody's individual. So you can say, I'm, the 3 days a week, I will go to bed. And it doesn't, that's another thing, people think that goals have to be like, I got to do this 7 days a week, right? Yeah. Even if you start off and say every Sunday night, because everybody dreads going to work on Monday, right? Every Sunday night, I'm going to turn off Netflix. I'm going to, turn my phone off at 9 o'clock and I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to be asleep by 10 and I'm going to get a full night's rest. And maybe you just do it that one night a week. And then once you conquer that, once you achieve that, you can say, you know what, I think I can do this 3 nights a week now, or I think I can do this, and then you build up from that point. But for me, I think that's it was for me a really important goal. So I would recommend that if people are looking for.
Cool. Thank you. That 3 nights a week is important too, because I was picturing 7 nights a week going to bed properly on time, but it's like, yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, Liz, I'll tell you 3 of my goals that I'm actually working on right now for diabetes related. So the first is pre-bolusing before dinner every night. So I'm taking my insulin 20 minutes before, and I've seen great over the past couple of weeks when I've been doing it. I've seen great success of keeping my blood sugars flat. I've also had a goal of it's kind of gone back and forth between intermittent fasting, so not eating until noon every day, which has been awesome for my morning and actually afternoon blood sugars as well, or having a very low carb breakfast has been a goal of mine. And then a third goal, which is more mental health related, is only looking at my CGM at night if there's an alarm. I don't know about you guys, but I know that sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and the first thing I'll do is just grab my phone or grab my pump and look at my blood sugar. And what I realize is like, who cares? If my alarm will go off if there's a problem. But if it's not going off, then my blood sugar is probably going to be just fine. And so that's helped me improve my sleep tremendously, because the blue light from the cell phone and it's easy to get on Facebook or something else when you do that. And so it's just been helpful just to trust my alarms and not touch my phone unless I have to.
Wow, that's a good one.
I think my goals that I'm working on right now that I just realized are goals that I'm working on is being consistent. So especially with exercising, being consistent with working out in whatever way that means. So if it means just going for a walk, if that means actually doing, a workout program or going for a run, whatever exercising means for me that day, being flexible with what that means, but doing it every day for me. I'm doing, I think, 5 days a week. So being able to be consistent every week, I think that helps me build confidence in myself that I can make commitments to myself and to my health and keep them. And over time, that's really helped me feel confident in my body. And I think that's also really important with the mental health aspect of everything, is just knowing that you can trust yourself and that you can trust your body to make good decisions. And my second one is to take my medications every day. I think that's something I've always struggled with, because there's always been that stigma of being on medication is bad and that you're a failure if you are, especially on insulin. And so taking my medication every day, I know that that's important, and that over time, that's going to help me in the long run. So just being also consistent with that, I think, is a really big goal I'm trying to keep up with.
Liz, do you have any just suggestions or thoughts for people who are newly diagnosed with type 2 and are super overwhelmed? Where is there some kind of goal or some way to kind of take, there's a million tasks I feel like people are told when they are diagnosed with type 2 that they need to just suddenly be perfect at. Do you have an idea of kind of how to boil that down and calm down the pressure?
Yeah. So, keep it to the basics. If, you're supposed to, carb count, if that's what you need to do, then start with carb counting 1 meal a day, and then slowly add in your other meals until you can, carb count for all your meals. But breaking it down into those baby steps, kind of how we've talked about so far, I think is really important to be able to, manage that and to not get overwhelmed and immediately go to burnout. So do focus on one thing. And really, I think prioritizing really helps with that. Prioritizing what's going to give me the most benefit if I do this one thing versus another. So some days that's going to be taking my medication and exercising. Other days it's going to be bubble baths and medication. So whatever works for you. And I would say the biggest thing I wish I would have learned from the beginning when I was first diagnosed is to listen to my body, because no one's going to know my body better than I do. And so if a medication's not working, I need to know that. I need to be able to know how I feel, what my, body's baseline is. And that takes a lot of listening for you to know how your body responds to things, how it responds to stress, especially. So learning what your baseline is, how you react to certain things, medications, lifestyle changes, and food. Yeah. But being very careful not to obsess over CGMs and measuring things, because it's a very fine line between being careful and being obsessive over it. So that's what I would recommend.
Okay, thank you. On that topic of how your body reacts to things, that has definitely shaped a lot of my goals around food, not in the way people usually think, but I don't like eating a hot lunch. It just makes me feel heavy and tired for the rest of the afternoon. I like cold food for lunch, and that's a little neurotic maybe, but it's the specifics. I think that if you tune in, you're how do I actually feel after I do XYZ or eat XYZ? It can help just improve the little details. So we have a question from someone watching who has a 5-year-old with type 1 diagnosed. She's asking, if you were diagnosed before adulthood, how did you transfer from your parents guiding your management to you doing it on your own? Even if you weren't diagnosed early on, do you have any advice for parents out there navigating this? Mark, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. That's a challenge. And it's really, there's no specific answer because it really varies by the child. But really, I think that the goal is for, just as children without diabetes become more independent in their lives, they start going over to friends' houses. Maybe they ride their bike down the street by themselves without supervision. And the same thing is true for kids with diabetes, is to be able to become more independent both in their lives and also in their diabetes management. So as long as they're safe. And I think that part of it is really on the kid and allowing the kid to launch, if you will. But also, I think for parents, there's a big challenge there too. And maybe thinking about this in terms of goals is, as a parent, knowing the details, or knowing the facts about your child, and knowing that he or she is how responsible they are and how aware they are, allowing yourself to let go a little bit. especially knowing that they're going to be safe, and especially if you have a CGM, and especially if they have a pump, so they could, some of that management is taken off your hands and you're able to monitor it. But part of it is setting a goal for yourself and allowing yourself to let go. But trust me, I know that that's not an easy thing, and but I think that's a great thing to set goals around. Is how can my child go to a sleepover? How can he or she go to school and count carbs for his lunch by himself? And and allow yourself to fail. Again, I think this is a place where perfectionism is not possible all the time. Certainly, we don't want people to fail to the extreme where they're going to be in medical trouble, but that's a fairly rare thing to have happen. And so, trust yourself and trust your gut, but also trust your child to the extent that you reasonably can.
I was diagnosed at 13. And so it's like kind of the age where you start transitioning to being more responsible for stuff. And I think something my parents did really well that helped me in that is that they let me make mistakes. And they, back then this is 1999, they didn't have CGMs where they could track me all day long. And I think the CGMs, the way we can see a child's blood sugars all day long, can create more anxiety for the parent, right? Like, oh, they're high, and or they're dropping low. I think if as the parent, if my children were to develop type 1, I would really have to remind myself, it's okay. The high blood sugar is not going to blind them. It's not that. There has to be fluctuations, and there has to be them making mistakes and learning how to deal with them on their own, even though it's a health related thing, which makes it feel very urgent. It's like, you got to step back and let them ease into it on their own way. It's their disease at the end of the day.
Can I add something, Junior? I know we're talking about pediatrics here, but the same goes for adults too. I think you were answering about individuals newly diagnosed with diabetes. I think a lot of times when your provider tells you have diabetes, it's automatically these numbers are good, these numbers are bad. And so you're put in this bucket of, if I do these things and these are my numbers, then I'm bad. And if I do these things and my numbers are this, then I'm good. And so one of the things that I always did with my patients was tell them, you can fail. It's okay to fail. There's good and there's better, right? There's no bad. There's no, worse. There's no, you have to learn to show yourself grace. And so I think that we need to tell people that are living and managing diabetes, it's okay to fail. Like you said, show yourself grace. Another thing that I found is a lot of times when people are newly diagnosed, it's like they want to cram in all this information over the weekend and then get an A on the test. And that's just not how the diagnosis works. And I think it's important to say, look, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. The way that you're going to continue to grow and live and find out about yourself, and you'll change as you change over time. So will this condition. And so just being able to say, it's okay to fail. It's okay to make mistakes. You're going to figure this out. It's a marathon, not a sprint. I think it's so important to tell people from the beginning.
And actually, when Liz introduced herself, she said, I'm still figuring it out. And I thought in my head, well, I've had type 1 for 23 years, and technically I'm maintaining my goals, but I'm still learning about my diabetes all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's tiny little things to learn forever. And I think if you tell yourself you're bad and you failed, there's nowhere to go from there, versus like, oh, my blood sugar is really high after that meal. What I took didn't work, and I'm going to make a note of that and try something different next time.
Yeah, I think that I love this discussion about failure, and my podcast next week is about failure and diabetes, and I challenge people to fail in their diabetes because there's no other way to grow. I also think that we've done a really poor job at, well, not us in the diabetes community, but as parents of talking about failure and talking about that in the context of diabetes. I have people come to me and they say, my time in range is awful. I'm failing. I was like, what's your time in range? 65%. And I said, that's an amazing time in range. No, that's a D in school, 65%. I need to be at 90%. I was like, I don't know anybody who is at 90% consistently for any period of time. That's impossible. So where we know that if you have a time in range of 70%, you're doing really well. If you're 80%, you're pretty much a rock star. And 90%, you're like a unicorn. So, but so reframing, what is success and what is failure, and that it's okay to have failures.
Yeah.
They're not going to, don't be stupid. Don't not take your insulin. Don't not check your blood sugar. That's stupidity, not a failure. Failure is doing everything that you're supposed to do and not having it be successful. And it's very rare that ends in tragedy.
Right. Well said. And I think that same idea can kind of be applied to food. I feel like people think they've got to figure out how to sustain some certain type of diet for the rest of their life. When I think about my own relationship with food and what I eat, and I like my relationship with food, but I feel like I've actually been working on it for 10 years by experimenting and trying new things. And when it stops working for me, I move on and I experiment somewhere else. And I think it's really important to let your experience be open to trying a lot of stuff and figuring out what does and doesn't work for you.
Can I add
go ahead.
that where, especially for people who are newly diagnosed and for goal setting, you're going to have to try new things to figure out whether they work for you or they don't. And that applies to food, that applies to lifestyles, and that also applies to medications. And it's going to be very frustrating because it's this trial and error and doing it essentially every day over and over and over until you maybe find something that works for you, but then life's going to happen and it might change again. So you're going to have to show yourself a lot of grace and a lot of patience when you're going through each individual trial and error. But it's going to pay off. I'm definitely glad that I stuck it through to find what medications work for me, and having the patience with my healthcare provider team on figuring that out, and patience with my insurance and dealing with that, which can be a whole different community table. But yeah, diabetes, I think, is trial and error with yourself, essentially.
And just because something works really well for somebody on an Instagram page doesn't mean it has to work for you.
Right.
We have another question. She says, I've been processing my diagnosis and trying to figure everything out in the past 2 weeks. I've been having major mood swings and crying, and I'm worried it's affecting my 5-year-old and my 11-year-old negatively. Any advice on how to explain to them what's going on with me?
I think the first thing is to give yourself some grace. It sounds like from the question that you're newly diagnosed, like very newly diagnosed. And so if that's the case, then, allow yourself to process. And I would say that at this point, with your kids, just let them know that you're struggling, and that, that you'll, to the degree that they can understand, that you have some health issues, and that you're taking care of them and you're working towards them, and that you need a little bit of time. Because a diagnosis of diabetes, whether it's type 1 or type 2, can be a traumatic event. And we don't want that to, and while we don't want you to feel helpless and upset, we know that when you experience trauma, there's a natural course of that trauma. And by not experiencing it and trying to push it away or trying to ignore it, actually keeps you stuck in it. And so it's important to allow yourself to be sad and to mourn whatever, the loss that you're feeling, and be upset for a time. If that goes on for more than a couple of months, then you may want to talk to a mental health professional and get some help. But we expect that those types of feelings are going to happen. You're going to feel that way for a little while. But generally speaking, for most people, they do come back down to baseline, and you're able to process. You have processed it and be able to explain to your kids in how, in what's going on in a really calm way. One thing I want to say is that if for whatever reason you're still feeling this overwhelm in a couple of months, it doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. There's no, it's kind of a random thing about who gets stuck in that traumatic cycle and who doesn't, and it says nothing about you and how, anything about you, your diabetes, yourself, or anything. It's just kind of how we all process things differently. So I'm sorry that you're struggling right now, but know that the support is there for you if you need it.
Thank you, Mark. And actually, something that you just reminded me of, some way to create a goal around not feeling like you have to figure everything out in 2 weeks might be, like the internet is wonderful, but it can also be too much, right? So maybe limit yourself to every Monday and Friday, you're going to read one article about type 1 diabetes. And I'd recommend just going to Google and typing, how does caffeine affect, something really specific about your life, wine and type 1 diabetes, or alcohol and type 1, coffee and type 1, or exercising and type 1 diabetes. Add beyond type 1 at the end of that Google search. You'll find things, and choose one article twice a week to read so that you're not overwhelming yourself and expecting yourself to figure it all out. Mark and I have had type 1 for 22, 23 years, and we're still learning. So take it easy on yourself. All right, until any other questions come in, I'm going to ask if there, the three of you, knowing preparation is key to success. What are some essentials that you keep handy or pack in your diabetes bag just when you leave the house? How do you just make sure you're prepared to deal with diabetes on a day-to-day basis?
So first, I don't, for clients, one of the things that I recommend is that they keep a list of emergency contact, or that they put the ICE in case of emergency contact in their cell phone in the event that they have, a hypoglycemic episode or something like that. The paramedics can find that contact in their phone. So having that on hand is something that they can set up to set them up for success.
Thank you.
I always have snacks.
Snacks?
Yeah, I always have snacks, especially now in the winter. It's always important to have some in the car for in case of emergencies. But I always have snacks in my drawer. And I also especially at work, I let my coworkers know where my snacks are in case of emergency. Can you go get me a juice box? Here's where it is. Here's where my keys are to get into my office. So having snacks and having accessibility to it, I think, is what really helps me stay prepared in case of emergency. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and for me, I always have sugar with me in some capacity. Smarties are my go-to, as well as backup supplies. I have some horror stories from my own life about my younger days when I did not have sugar or backup supplies, and suffice to say, I'm happy to tell those stories at some point later, but suffice to say, they were not good experiences, and so I try to I'm prepared now with just those basics.
One thing I've started doing, in addition to the fast-acting carbs for obvious lows, is some kind of healthy-ish bar in my car, so that I'm not if I'm just suddenly starving and I'm in my car and I'm out and about, I have something that I believe is reasonably good for me right there. We have one more question. What suggestion do you have to set up the range? I think she's talking about blood sugar goal ranges. What will be the best way to determine your personal ranges?
Healthcare provider.
Yeah.
Talk to your healthcare provider. Yeah.
Talk to your healthcare provider. Okay.
There's textbook ranges, but everybody is different, and your diabetes is managed individually. So definitely talk to your healthcare provider.
Yeah,
there's a lot of factors. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
And I would also say, yeah, talk to your healthcare provider about what your range, what they would suggest that your range is best for you. And then if you're thinking about setting a range, if you have a CGM and you're thinking about setting a ranges there, they're different from the healthcare providers. Make sure that you kind of assess for yourself what your tolerance for stress is. So certainly if you set your high alarm at 130 or 140, which is really low, and I wouldn't recommend it, but you're going to have alarms go off quite a bit. And so certainly it may improve your glycemic control a little bit, but it's going to be annoying for you, a bed partner, your colleagues, and having those alarms go off all the time. And so you want to be able to, so bringing it up to 170, 180, or whatever your healthcare provider recommends may be a better option for you if those types of things really kind of get you stressed out.
And if your goal is too tight and it's causing you to have a lot of roller coasters and lows, then it's time to talk to your healthcare team about helping you figure out how to smooth things out a teeny bit and stay safer. Oh, I have Jordan, I don't know if you know, I'm getting messages separately. Should I address these? Do we have time? I have one more question here. I'm on Afrezza and Tresiba because I find it allows me to exercise more easily. Curious about your regimens and why you like them. I actually use Afrezza, Lantus, and some Novolog. And I love it. I exercise first thing in the morning when I don't have a ton of insulin on board from eating. Or I time my exercise for, let's say I ate at noon and I want to exercise at 3. I know that Novolog is mostly out of my system because it's been at least 3 hours. 4 hours is ideal. Or if you're taking a Freza for your meal, then it's out within an hour and it makes it a lot easier. So I time all my personal workouts for right before eating instead of after eating.
Yeah,
Right.
and I'll say that I take Novolog, but in terms of habits for exercise, I exercise early in the morning, and I find that if I generally take 2 units of insulin before I start working out without eating, and that generally keeps me flat. If I don't take insulin before I work out, my blood sugar will spike after my workout, which is never fun.
Mhm.
So it's kind of
after. Okay.
yeah. So it stays stable, and then it'll start rising afterwards. So I've learned through trial and error to basically pre-bolus for my workout without actually eating. But I need those 2 units to stay stable in the morning. If I work out in the afternoon, not the same thing.
And it, of course, depends on the type of exercise you're doing. And we actually have a huge thing on Instagram. If you look in the stories, a million videos explaining exercise with diabetes. So I recommend checking out the Beyond Type 1 daily Instagram account. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And I'm going to toss it back to Jordan so we can close it out.
Awesome. Echoing Ginger, thank you to all of you for being here and sharing your perspectives. And thank you to everybody tuning in tonight. The Facebook comments have just been blowing up. So much amazing community happening and so many people pulling up a chair at this virtual table here. We love it so much. We've covered so much ground. For those of you watching, we do have another community table coming at you next month. It's going to be on February 24th. And we're touching on a topic that so many people asked about last year, which is finding support as spouses and significant others to people with diabetes. Super, super important. And obviously, you know, we're really keen on talking about that during the month of February. But be sure to stay tuned into Beyond Type 1's channels. Be on the lookout for not only that conversation, but new content highlighting takeaways from tonight's awesome conversation. Thank you again to this amazing group, and we will see you all again next month at the community table. Good night, everyone.